This week, we're talking about sneaky averages, where the provision of a single, isolated statistic might not tell you the whole story, or, as is sometimes the case, tells a completely different one.
I do remember at school learning about the mean, median and mode, going, well, what's the point in the middle point?
If you go to what is the average income of America, if you have a few highly rich people in there, you end up with a situation where nearly everybody is actually below average. So in a situation like that, you're generally better off using the median, but probably you just need to look at the data.
The worst is when people do an average of averages. If one data set is really big and the other one is really small, that just really messes up the data.
When I called it sneaky averages, I didn't really mean that people are usually sneaky.
Tantalizingly close to reaching the top spots on all global podcast platforms, we continue in our quest to bring you the very best audio content money can't buy. So what is it? It's a podcast. When is it? Well, we record on Tuesday evenings once the kids have gone to bed, but it's released into your audio stratosphere first thing Thursday mornings. How is it? Don't you worry, it's doing just fine. Who is it? I'm glad you asked. I'm Rob Bell, hello, and joining me to delve into the world of sketchplanations once again this week is Southwest London's visionary virtuoso Jono and Hertfordshire's favourite headstrong heartthrob. It's Tom Pellerow. Good evening, chaps.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I mean, this won't matter, or actually probably be noticeable to listeners because there won't be a gap between episodes when this goes out. But here we are, all together after quite some time, actually. It's been a while. I mean, I guess due to factors, brackets general, we've not recorded a podcast for a little while, and but we've also been away and done some cool stuff in that time.
Mostly Tom. Mostly Tom's been away.
Yeah.
I was 8 hours ahead last week, which I know you really wanted me to record it, but I'd only been asleep for about 3 hours, so that wasn't going to be possible.
I think it would have added a different dynamic to it. It would have been hilarious.
Yeah, I might have.
Wake up.
I might be more awake, actually. I don't know. That was without the kids as well.
Love to have seen the new directions that you would have taken us in at that time in the morning. Yeah. So John, sorry, Tommy, you were away with work, were you?
Yeah, I was in Hong Kong and China this time last week. It was 29 degrees, it's boiling. I went over there with a couple of suits, the jackets and all that. It was like, why did I bring any of these things? It was boiling compared to here.
Sure,
it's funny, isn't it, saying like the weather in China, but because I bet somewhere in China at the same time it was freezing cold, probably snowing.
Yes.
Such a massive country.
Yeah.
And Jono and I have actually been away in the south of France in that time as well. We went and did a SwimRun race down there. Yeah, it was down there. Well, fully branded up, Jono there. Lovely.
It's true. Actually, I don't brand up for many things, but I do like these events, even though they're way too hard.
They are hard.
Yeah.
I always forget every year how difficult it is.
Yeah.
We do, with Jono and I, over the last, I don't know, what should we say, 7 years?
Yeah.
Something like that. I've done events called races in the discipline of SwimRun, which is a series of swims and runs. And every year we really, really look forward to it. And every year when we get there, we train for it. We work quite hard, and it's really nice because there's some other friends of ours who do it as well, and you get to spend all this time in the build up to it. And then you get there, and it's really difficult.
What to call it a swim and a run sounds like quite a leisurely day, but
Well, it's a number of swims and a number of runs.
Yeah. How far are these things?
Well, yeah, it's quite.
It's like 50 kilometres run and 10 kilometres
Too
swim
long.
or something.
Take
It's
hours.
insane.
Yeah.
It takes all day.
I'm sure we've talked about SwimRun before. Yeah. But Tommy, I'm sure your trip out to China was similarly grueling as well.
Yeah, it's always pretty.
Because I know what it's like. Because obviously the opportunity to go out there. It's not like you're going out there, a number of times a year.
No.
So when you do go out there, I know you've got a lot of stuff to get done, a lot of people to see.
Yes, first time I've been out for 4 years.
Oh, is it?
And the country continues to expand and change enormously. And crazy things like you don't use a credit card to pay for anything in China. Everything is done via WeChat, which is their equivalent of WhatsApp, and you pay via like QR codes that you have on your phone. So if you go with like a credit card or with cash, they're kind of like, oh, what's this? And you don't have to like log in, or you end up letting someone else pay for you the whole time. It's sort of really weird. It's just like being a child again. You're like, oh, sorry, I can't pay for anything. Can you help me? Yeah.
Wow. What about the whole travel aspect, Tommy? Because this, as you alluded to, is 8 hours ahead, right? So to get that far ahead, that's a lot of travel, right? I know it's probably only one flight or a couple of flights.
Yeah, direct flight, 12 hours to Hong Kong. Luckily,
do you still enjoy that?
No, I continue to always fly economy. I haven't, and I go past those lovely bed seats at the front of the plane and go, oh, that would be really lovely on the way back. Luckily, I am fairly kind of average height and build, so I fit quite well into the seats. I wouldn't want to be like 6'5" on a plane. That must be horrible.
Johnny, you still quite enjoy like a long haul flight, don't you? You enjoy that. Yeah, again, you've talked about it on the podcast. You just enjoy people bringing you food and watching movies, really cool. And there is no expectation other than that.
Well, looking out the window is kind of magical, isn't it?
Yeah, agreed.
Whenever you stop and think that you're floating through the clouds at ridiculous speeds and looking at incredible parts of the world, you're like this, flying over places that you may never go. But you get to see him. Like, that's pretty cool. Yeah. It's like watching one of those Apple screensavers, but in real life.
I often get quite inspired when you get a nice clear day and you're up at, 30 or 1,000 feet, looking down over incredible landscapes. I think the last time I did this was flying back from west coast of America somewhere, and you're coming right across America, and there's just huge expanses of nothing. So, not much civilization, and it's really inspiring. Like, oh, I'd love to get on a bike and ride that, or motorbike through it, or just something cool. It's inspiring, yeah.
Then you land and you're in a queue of people, and you got to get a bus.
Yeah.
Bring you literally right back down to earth.
I mean, I would crash. I mean, I will factor in the means of travel on certain trips now and think, oh, do I really want to go through all the hassle of getting to an airport, going through the airport, security, all of that? I don't enjoy any of it anymore. So I spend quite a bit of time in France.
Swim and run.
Well, I spend quite a bit of time in France, right? So there are different options to get to France. I've got to France, a few different ways. I've flown, I've taken the Eurostar, I've driven and taken the ferry, I've driven and taken the Channel Tunnel, and I've cycled on the ferry. Yeah.
On the ferry?
Well, I've cycled and taken the ferry.
Yeah. You haven't cycled
perfectly valid ways. Yet. No.
Why not?
Well, apart from the obvious reasons. Hovercraft. Tom and I think you and I have taken the hovercraft.
And the hovercraft. That's the best. That was the best. But what my point is that there are options to do that, and I would tend to take an option that is just the most pleasant travelling experience.
Lovely.
Yeah. Even if it might be more expensive or takes a bit longer.
Check you out.
Normally takes a bit longer. So. Anyway, we are all back. We've unpacked. The laundry's on. I've just finished watering the houseplants, and there's a stack of mail over there. Oh, it's mostly junk mail. Am I right? But that can wait, because we have serious business to attend to. The whys, hows, and wherefores won't answer themselves, Here's the podcast. This week, we're talking about sneaky averages, where the provision of a single, isolated statistic might not tell you the whole story, or, as is sometimes the case, tells a completely different one. The sketch for this episode should be displayed on your screens now, but if not, then you can see it at sketchfornations.com, and I'll include the link to this specific sketch in the podcast description down below. And before we get into it properly, remember, you can get in touch with us about your thoughts on sneaky averages, or any of us, or any of our previous episodes for that matter, by emailing us Tom, what's the email address? I know it's been a while, but...
I have no idea. hello@sketchplanations.com.
Thank you. All right then, let's start, as many a lecture, speech, or even previous Sketchplanations the podcast episode have before, by quoting Mark Twain, who wrote, or supposedly once wrote, there are 3 kinds of lies: lies, damned lies, and statistics. Right then, Jono, let's hear about how you came to think up this idea for a sketch. First of all, probably, do you want to talk us through the sketch itself on sneaky averages?
Yeah, it's really simple one, this one, in terms of the sketch. So it's just trying to point out your average may be hiding something, and it's really a visual for a little story/joke that I read, which was about the statistician who drowned after seeing that the average depth of water was 3 feet, and so I thought that it's quite a nice illustrative example of some of the pitfalls of averages. And so the sketch is that statistician. Oh, he's got a clipboard.
He's got a clipboard. It's brilliant.
Anyway, and he's gently floating down into this trench with a little fish looking on and a big sign saying average depth 3 feet. And of course, there was a lot of shallow water that he perhaps was walking through, and then he suddenly disappeared down.
Like ankle deep.
Exactly.
Shallow water, yeah.
And so that's what the sketch is. It's called Sneaky Averages, and it's trying to point out that your average may be hiding something.
Indeed. And when you had this in mind, were you thinking specifically about averages or kind of misleading statistics more generally?
So I was thinking about averages. There were a couple of things that came together for this one. The first one is, and I picked it out, was I read this. I bought this fun, really old book. It's not a really old book called How to Lie with Statistics.
Nice.
Which is it's kind of a fun title, but basically the whole book is all the ways that it's the other way around, really. Statistics lie to you, or you can be misled by statistics, which of course you could use if you wanted to lie with them. And it has a chapter which I read a while before about the well-chosen average, and it talks about how averages can be very misleading in some contexts. And then much later, I came across that little story about the statistician who drowned after seeing the average depth was 3 feet, and then I was like, maybe that's a way to illustrate it in a visual. So that's how I came across it. And because I read that chapter about averages, the well-chosen average, I was thinking about averages. Obviously, there's many, many ways. And actually, I've got a few other sketches about different ways that charts and statistics can mislead you. But this was also because I think I come up to the issues with averages actually in my everyday life and in my day job. And so I had been thinking about it a fair bit. So that's nice to point out.
I think we are quoted, or we are subjected to averages coming at us from many different angles in our everyday life, in the news, in advertising, especially politics, and even science. Sometimes, scientific papers that you might read themselves, or summaries of in the news. Tommy, what's your view on this, having just seen you pop something in your mouth?
Yeah. I'm eating chocolate.
Come on. I thought we talked about this before on the podcast.
I was expecting you to chat for a bit longer.
Okay, so one area that I see it a lot, one area where I see it might not be averages. Tommy, that wasn't a cue to eat more.
He's going again.
I've created a link because on average,
podcast,
it's in my milk, in my dairy milk, there's a glass and a half of milk in every bar, but there's definitely not a glass and a half in that little bar there. But sorry, what was the question?
Well, I was going to say one area where you see statistics used in advertising a lot is in the beauty industry. And so a lot of the time you do see, I don't know, in shampoo or beauty product adverts, that it tells you about the product benefits and the results of people using them, and followed up with phrases like 78% of customers agree. and then the corner of the screen in like a lightly coloured text on a white background. It states that those results were from, I don't know, 76 out of 98 women surveyed. Typically, you might see something like that.
Yeah.
So are you aware of using averages? Is it something you've come across in your line of work with your products and how you market those?
Yes, on lots of different levels of it. Obviously, I'm an engineer, so I do love statistics and numbers and data, and have been fortunate enough to have quite a lot of training in it and how to spot for things that can go wrong. I do find that a huge amount of advertising, marketing, digital marketing is all about numbers, Jono. I'm sure you have this as well. You're talking to your agency and the number of click-throughs and the click-through rate and the percentage click-through rate and the cost per click-through rate and blah, blah, blah. And often they sort of average all that together to sort of say, this campaign this week you've spent X amount and this is how good we are, sort of thing. And you then have to start drilling into that information to find out. Often they have been very good in some things and it hasn't been so good in others. And so that kind of danger of averaging out information can be... The worst is when people do an average of averages. They take an average of this data set and an average of this data set and then take an average of the two. And if one data set is really big and the other one is really small, say, that just really messes up the data. Yeah. So I do remember at school learning about the mean, median and mode, going, well, what's the point in the middle point, like the median? But actually that's quite a useful one. We use that quite a lot when we're surveying people.
Is it worth
out their view?
Is it worth quickly just explaining the difference between those three?
Yes, Jono.
Yeah, did you come across it? I actually have a very old sketch called Measures of Central Tendency, which goes through the difference between mean, median and mode, and they're all different types of averages essentially, but the one we normally talk about when it's average is the mean value, which is the one we're most familiar with, where you just add them all up and you divide by the number of items. So that's the most common. But the median value is like if you put all of the numbers and in a list and ranked in rank order, you take the middle one of the list. And then the mode is if you lined up all the numbers and you said, okay, well, which one comes up the most? Yeah. So they're all different types of measures that you can use. And actually, one of the things he talks about in the book that I read is that when someone says average, you might assume that they mean the mean, but they might not. They might be talking about the median, and you don't know. Absolutely.
And I think in a general lexicon, the word average has come to mean like the normal, like the norm, which it can be, but it doesn't necessarily mean that.
Yeah, there was I don't know if you came across this at the risk of using up all my sketches in one podcast. There was one. Did you come across the one wealth inequality in America? Another very old one, and it was from a video talking about wealth inequality and income. So a lot of things a mean is quite a good measure. So for example, if you said what is the average height of people in a country?
Yeah.
People tend to be on like a normal distribution, and so you don't tend to have like massive outliers of that. Some people are going to be generally somewhere between 5 foot and 6 foot something.
Because when you use a mean average, those outliers can be quite distorting.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
If you've got a few that are particularly small or a few that are particularly big, that can skew.
And so that's why I was saying, so generally speaking, something like a height, you don't have that. But the wealth inequality one is something where actually you have enormous inequalities. And actually you think about it, you go, okay, well, like obviously some people are really don't have very little money living on the street. A lot of people are somewhere in the middle, and then there are some rich people. And then you go, well, the rich people are really quite a lot richer. So it's probably quite a big spike at the end. And then actually, if you were to chart it out, the rich people are like literally off the charts rich, like way off the top. And so you actually have you have this strange situation if you go to like what is the average income of America? It's very, or a neighborhood or something like that. If you have a few highly rich people in there, you end up with a situation where nearly everybody is actually below average.
Yeah.
Which is very strange. And so in a situation like that, where you have really big outliers, you're generally better off using the median, because you'd end up with something which is a bit more representative of the population. But probably you just need to look at the data, like you said, Tom, with your campaigns, and go, okay, that's the average, but let's have a look at it.
Yeah. Let's drill down on it. And I get accused a bit of being all about the detail and looking into stuff. And we're supposed to be saying, as a managing director and CEO of a company, we should be looking at high level of and just looking at the summaries of stuff. And I'm like, well, yeah, but actually, if we drill down in it, we often find that campaign that looked bad was only bad because there was one outlier that was really bad, and the rest of it was doing quite well. So if we turn that outlier off, actually the campaign looks really quite nice, whereas other campaigns can look really good, but they're not really good until you get into the detail. But Jono, on your point about average sort of or inequality in America, I think the junior doctors, when they were on strike, there was quite a lot of there were certain statements saying, oh, these junior doctors, they get paid a fortune. The average salary of junior doctors is, and it was because there were some quite high outliers because of specialisation that they get paid a lot. So they sort of drag the whole average up, whereas actually the median or the mode, what a typical junior doctor might get is actually much, much lower, especially when you factor in their overtime and the sort of sociability of their hours. It's a very different story. And so the government, who was saying that the strikers didn't deserve this extra, they were using one average, and the doctors, or the people representing the doctors, were using a very different average. Like, how can this be that your averages are so different? And it's
I think
damn lies and statistics.
Well, no, I mean, it's spot on, and that's why it's called like the well-chosen average, because often you might choose the reference point that works well for you, and I think that happens a lot in politics. Let's say you choose a data point to support your argument, and it's not necessarily that people have got them wrong, and they're not deliberately lying. They're just chosen a different way to represent the data that supports your point better. And so basically, like, this whole book is, don't take data at face value. Go, okay, well, where did it come from? How did you measure it? Yeah. What does it all look like? What were the people who were showing me this data? What do they care about? What have they got to lose or win by it?
Yeah. So and I guess when you're looking at data, there are three elements, or there are three phases involved in getting to that end result, where you've got a piece of data or a statistic to present. It's the so collecting the data. So how are you collecting it? Who are you choosing? How many are you choosing? There's how you process that data. So what are the maths that you're going to do on it? And then how are you going to present those results? They're the three different facets of producing and I guess publishing statistics. And if you know what you're doing, you could use the same data set and come up with completely different arguments. You could go in with the same kind of loose brief, but come out with two very different results on how you go about it. It's very interesting, and it was like I went into an absolute would you call it a rabbit hole? Yeah. Did you call it a rabbit hole? Yeah. I got into an absolute rabbit hole when I started reading around this, and I've started to lose my mind in it, because there's so much to it, especially when you look at it from a marketeer's perspective. So marketeers and statisticians' perspective, people who really, really know what they're doing when it comes to these numbers and can manipulate it, and not necessarily. When I say manipulate, it automatically feels like I'm saying it in an evil way. It's not. It's using data. That's what it is. It's manipulating using data.
I think a tricky thing is that you're not often in a position to know all of those pieces about the data you talked about. Like all you get is a statistic, and you're not really in a position to judge it in most cases. And that was true in science a lot as well. You get the results would be reported in papers, and there's a movement now generally to like include the original source data of your experiment as well, to allow other people to look at the data and check that it was done right, or maybe they could look at it a different way and see how you did it, as opposed to just publishing the result. But if you just get a number in a newspaper, you don't really know, and
Which is why I think all scientific data and papers should be presented in a pre-GCSE science experiment way. Title, aim, apparatus,
hypothesis,
method, results, raw results. What is it where you manipulate results? Analysis, conclusions.
Yeah.
That way you do have the full story. There you go. That's my pitch.
Good memories.
Great times. Genuinely, I get so excited.
Quite fun, wasn't it? It's like, hypothesis. Let's just make something up here. This is what we're trying to achieve. Brilliant.
But there's I mention in the description for this sketch I did a statistics course in the psychology department at UC Berkeley by this professor called Sheldon Zedeck, which is an awesome name.
Cool name.
Yeah. And he had a few things. So one of the things that he said, which I put in this article, which I really stuck with me, which was spend time with your data. And because that's when you notice that things are outliers. You haven't just sort of summed it up and said, okay, I've got all my data, I put it in the spreadsheet, I pressed the analysis, and this was the result. Is actually, you might have missed a ton of stuff unless you spent time with it. And I was trying to think, what were we talking about just before this? There was one other thing that he did, which that's right, your hypotheses. Sorry, and the other thing that he really cemented in me was this, what you call planned comparisons, because there's a great XKCD cartoon about it. There's a really interesting thing when you're doing an experiment, is that if you collect a lot of data and you look at it and you go, okay, well, I've got all of these people, I've got all these facets of the people, I've got all the things that they did in the experiment, and I've got all the outcomes. And if you look at enough combinations of things, there's a very good chance that some of these will correlate quite strongly. Yeah. And you'll be able to go, oh, well, as long as you're male and over 40, if you do this and eat greens, then you're going to live longer, right? But that's because you looked at 50 combinations. And it's like every time you look at a new combination for a new correlation, you have to put your threshold higher.
Your threshold for what?
Your threshold for whether or not it's chance. Sorry.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
So it could just be random in this particular sample. But what you need to do is you need to say, before you do your experiment, this is what I think is going to happen, and when I get the result, I'm going to look at this combination, because every time you come in and look at the combination, you've got just essentially some dice rolling
a little bit on. Yeah.
And if you look at enough of them, you might find something. The XKCD cartoon is, he's like, I think it's to do with jelly beans, and it's, do jelly beans, reduce your blood pressure or something like that. And he's like, red jelly beans don't reduce your blood pressure. Green jelly beans don't reduce blood pressure. And eventually he finds one of them, which had some random chance correlation that helps you out. And so it's a really strange facet of data that the more times you look at it, you have to take that into account. So when you talk about the hypotheses thing, that was one of the things that I remember Sheldon Zedeck taught me as well. Planned comparisons, should you be doing some analyses of your own.
So, because isn't there a kind of phrase for statistics in that correlation does not imply causation?
Absolutely.
That's the old,
how you set up.
That's the old shark attacks and ice cream sales.
There you go. Okay. Yeah.
So there's a massive correlation between ice cream sales and shark attacks in most countries, obviously, because shark attacks happen in the summer when people are eating ice cream.
Yeah. Well, there's a fantastic...
Obviously, sorry, when I say most countries, I exclude the UK. We don't get a lot of shark attacks, luckily.
Yeah, I can't remember the last one.
No.
There was a fantastic graph I saw in preparing for this... There's a fantastic graph I saw preparing for this chat tonight that pits the age of Miss America over a 10-year period against the number of annual murders in the US by steam, hot liquids, and hot vapors. And the two lines follow each other on this graph over this 10-year period almost perfectly.
Wow.
So you're thinking, wow, look at those. The age of Miss America and the number of annual murders by steam, hot liquids, and hot vapors. Obviously, there is no causation between these two. There is no correlation of these two items.
I wonder how long it took the researchers to find two that match. It must have just been there for days.
I don't know where you found that, but there's a site which collects those.
Amazing.
Oh, is it really? This was on a blog.
Oh yeah, no, it's brilliant. It's got all sorts of just ridiculous things that correlate with each other, but obviously have nothing to do with each other.
Oh, that's fantastic! I wonder if I can find that and include that link for that website.
Yeah, I forget the name at the moment, but it's a brilliant collection.
That's good. But then this brings us on to graphics that represent statistics as well, I think, because you can use graphics in a kind of cheeky way to get a point across, especially bar graphs. I think you can use those. I have seen them used. So there's an example in New South Wales that I came across in Australia. So the New South Wales government published a bar graph. This was a few years ago about nurse recruitment in the health system. Okay, and the graph shows 5 years, and you've got bars, and the bars are represented. There's it's like a line of 4 nurse icons in a row. That's like one line of these bars. So the first 3 years, the number of nurses stayed around the same, around 43,000, and that 43,000 over those first 3 years, each year was represented by a single row of 4 like nurse icons in a line. Okay. And then they showed their recent investment over the last 2 years, where numbers have increased in the first year, or that fourth year, by 3,100 nurses. Okay, and then a further 1,000 nurses in the 5th year. But that was represented on the graphs by stacking 7 more rows on top of each other in the first year and another 2 rows the following year. Right, so there was absolutely no scale or no consistent scale between these annual representations. So if you do look at it and look at the maths, in the first 3 years, a row of 4 nurses next to each other represented so if you do look at it, in the first 3 years, each one of those nurses represented around just under 11,000 nurses. Then in the 4th year, each nurse represented 1,300 nurses, and in the 5th year 1,100. I mean, it's an absolute shambles of a graph, and there's no y-axis scale on the graph whatsoever, because it would be all over the shop.
Yeah, there's tons you can do with that. Should you wish, you could have a search on the Sketchplanation site for ways that you can lie with charts and graphs, because there was some really nice book and work by Edward Tufty about the visual display of quantitative information, and he goes to town on examples like those and chart junk where people have embellished charts with all sorts of random things. There's some examples in this book of that sort of thing as well. There's the one that I see perhaps the most, which really bugs me, is a bit like that. They do something where, for example, you take the price of oil and you make it, you use a column chart, but instead of a column you do a barrel, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a oil, so you say it's $46 per barrel, let's say, and then you say it's $56 per barrel, and you just scale up the barrel up to a height of 56. And of course what you did there is the heights are the change in the price of oil, but a barrel which is up that big is now holding like 50 times as much oil as the previous one.
Because its height and its width and its depth all increase to that same amount.
Exactly, yeah. So you've massively accelerated things. So things like that where you use volume instead of area to compare things and stuff. And like that example where you haven't put the 0 on the chart. You've started it halfway. So if you want something to, I mean, if you want something to look like a big change.
A big
you just
jump,
start at 200, and you say go between 200 and 210, and then it's like a really exciting graph. Otherwise, it looks completely stable. Another one I found is if you're putting a chart on a PowerPoint slide or Google slide, let's say, and you want it to look like it's going up more, just make the chart narrower, and then it goes up more in a shorter space.
Yes.
Whereas if you want, So if your chart if it's not going up steep enough, because that's probably because you put your chart really wide on the page.
Yeah.
You just print it really narrow. And it's
That's good. That's good. I've got a board meeting with Lord Sugar in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, you try that.
I'll make sure.
Can I give you another trick,
that.
Tommy? Another trick for sales.
Yeah.
Cumulative sales.
Yeah. Cumulative sales is excellent.
And it's always on the way up.
Yeah, exactly. And don't take any negatives out. Like that nursing example, I imagine they did not include the number of nurses that left during
I'm
those
sure
7
not.
years.
Yeah,
it was
sure
only
not.
the recruitment, not the actual total number of nurses.
Yeah.
Doing that. That's a pretty clever one as well.
Sorry, Jono, go on.
Well, I was going to say, when I called it sneaky averages, I was thinking I didn't really mean that people are usually sneaky.
Little
I just meant
snipe.
that averages often hide something, and they are a little bit sneaky.
Yeah,
but I feel like we veered into the people that are sneaky.
We have. So I was going to.
territory.
Have we reached that cynical age? Is that the reality?
No, and I'm glad you clarify this, John, and I'm glad you clarify, because this does happen quite often in this podcast where your sketch has a very clear intention of what it's trying to communicate.
And Rob finds the darker side of it.
Yeah, we absolutely hijack it and take it on a journey that it doesn't deserve to go on.
Okay, so therefore, I do have a very nice example for you of this, and it's also a nice link in the fact that a couple of podcasts ago, Jono talked about analysis and surveying, and asked me, how. So we've got 20 new ideas that I'm looking into for next year at the moment, and as a result of Jono's suggestion, we did a a survey? We did an anonymous survey put together in Google Sheets, and we asked people to, give their view just as a guide of how much do you like this particular idea, 0 to 10 on these 20 different things. And then we got the results, and then I see those results, and I started I did the obvious kind of what is on average the most popular one. And then you kind of go, oh, there's quite a lot of, average. And you're like, oh, hang on. Okay, well, actually, am I looking for average, or am I looking for the median, the kind of middle one? Because a number of people were always quite kind about their lowest. Their lowest was only ever a 5 or up to an 8, where some people were like a 1 or a 10.
Were you standing in front of them with your charming face at the time with a clipboard?
No. This is done totally anonymous. They did it online, and then I realised that some people were actually incredibly generous. So out of the 20 different ideas in total, some people had given twice as many points, so to speak, as other people. It's like, oh, okay. So I'm here looking at this data, being the person who is trying to get something useful out of this data, going, okay, now I've got to normalise it all, so that if someone always gives higher votes, they're actually the same as someone who always gives lesser votes in total. And then I've got to use the median rather than the average, because that's actually misleading as well. But it keeps on changing the order. And then I'm trying to present this to another senior colleague, and he's like, oh my God, Tom, this is supposed to be simple. What is this median? Why have you normalised data? Why do you make everything so complicated? And I'm like, well, because actually it is unfortunately quite important to do this. I'm not trying to be sneaky with my own personal averages. I'm trying to get something useful out of this, and that involves quite a lot of analysis to take the sneakiness out of it.
Nice, yeah. You were revealing the sneakiness by spending time with your data.
Yeah, because because what are the risks what are the risks to you, Tommy, of presenting data that is, whether intentionally or unintentionally, misleading about those products? If we take that example.
Well, in this instance, it's kind of like we're then going to put more energy, more resource into the ones that are seemingly. Yeah, it's just a very early stage, and actually,
I know, yeah, but it's a good example.
It is, and so I'm fortunate in the fact I've had quite a lot of training of this sort of stuff, and I do really feel for people who potentially haven't, who are trying to kind of make decisions, and you do have to be quite smart with your analysis of stuff when you're making decisions. So yes, Rob, it could have been we make a bad decision as a result.
And I guess that is the risk of data being presented to people who might not have the time or the inclination or the understanding to further interrogate and understand the context of that. The risk is that people could make bad decisions for themselves based on sneaky averages, whether that is sneaky, just the average itself, or the statistician behind it,
and drown in a puddle,
and end up drowning in a puddle. Exactly.
A puddle with a pit. It's a really flat puddle except for the pit.
A pothole. One of those potholes. You think, oh, that's nothing to that. Oh,
yeah. I think intuitively, all of us have quite a lot of practice thinking about this in some ways. When, like, if you're taking into account reviews, and reviews is something where we're presented with data all the time. You know, something got 4.5 out of 5, or this one's 5, and there's a number of reviews. And then I always think reviews are one where it's so, like you said about where did it come from and how did you prepare it and how did you publish it, really affect those things. Because reviews are extremely, and this is what happens in our work quite a lot, which is bimodal, I think. And so you end up with like loads of reviews of products where you either put a 1 or you put a 4 or a 5. Either this was awful, or you're 4 or 5, and you never heard from all the 3s because they couldn't be bothered.
Is that what you mean by bimodal? Is that what that means in that context?
I mean
there or there.
Yeah. So if you were to chart them out and plot them on a line, you'd be like, oh, there's a big cluster at 1 of people who had an awful experience. Yeah. And then there's a big cluster of people who thought this was amazing. Yeah. And very often there's nothing in between.
The 2s and 3s. Yeah, it's fine. I can't be bothered. And
there's quite tricky because you're like, well, actually, we didn't hear from all the people who would have filled out the middle thing, and we heard from the ones. And so, but I think people sort of know that if you're reading reviews on a site, you go, well, would I have done? What do I do when I do reviews? And maybe I'll read a few reviews. Do I agree with the 1-star? Okay, I'm cool if that's what the 1-star review is, because I don't think that person's worth listening to, or something like that. Or maybe it was just a bad day. It's like the people who review a product on Amazon and they say, this was excellent, arrived very quickly. And I'm like,
that's not a review.
Amazon have been doing that for decades. Let's talk about the product.
5-star. Arrived on time. What? It's not a review.
So I think reviews is something which is very much like, you take an average, and it usually doesn't mean very much.
Which is why you have to dig further, and when you're on things like, I don't know, Uber or Airbnb or a trusted house sitter, I don't know, whatever it might be, you kind of then, or even like with tradespeople as well, which is something I've been spending a bit of time with, you need to look at that average and then delve in and look at some of the comments where you get a bit more qualitative information to back up that average, which may or may not be sneaky.
Yeah, if you have that. I mean, how do you do, with like rating Uber drivers or Airbnbs? Do you use the full range of?
No, I'm bimodal with it, Jono. I'm bimodal.
You're 1s and 5s.
1s and 5s, but typically 5s, because 1s you go, oh, I'm not even going to bother.
Yeah,
I think. Well, because you never know, because they might be having a bad day as well.
So it might have been a bad ride, but you're wondering about how they feel. Maybe they really need the job. I don't want to.
I'll give them a 5.
Screw them over.
It was awful. I'll give them a 5.
What's quite nice is I feel like we're all becoming pretty smart about that kind of stuff.
Do you think general public?
I think we're all getting a lot smarter about, especially reviews, and having a bit of a deep dive into what the reviews actually say, and having a look at the most recent reviews, because often reviews can be staggeringly old. Like something's got 19,000 5-star reviews, and you look at the most recent ones, and the last 20 are like 1 star, saying this product is just rubbish. Don't believe the review. Like, you've got to look at the kind of recent ones and the historic ones, or sometimes it can be the other way around, that something looks bad, then you read the most recent reviews and it says, they've done a lot of work to improve this, and I really love it now, and that sort of thing. So, but we all get to see this.
But I tell you where a real difficulty with this is in politics, where statistics are being used on both. I say both. There may be more than two sides of an argument or of an issue, because we're aware of how data can be manipulated and how averages can be sneaky, intentionally sneaky, and so how do you decide who to trust without having to do as much reading as was probably necessary to create those statistics in the first place?
Yeah, do all the work yourself.
Which obviously nobody can do. So when you're talking there about something like the general public, you feel like there's probably a decent understanding about how that works with the review system, with apps and things like that, because it has become quite a common vocabulary and a common language for us all. When it comes to politics, I think that it's becoming increasingly difficult, actually.
I completely agree, and it's unfortunately very, very difficult, and I think potentially democracy has been slightly warped. To plug a podcast, more or less, from the BBC podcast, is brilliant in terms of looking at statistics and understanding.
Tim Harford, is that it?
Yeah. Undercover Economist is also a very good book.
Also by Tim Harford.
You're completely right, Rob. There are a lot of misuse of statistics and statements.
So is it fair
on both sides?
Is it fair to knowingly use statistics sneakily? Because like a statistic that has come from data is valid in some sense, right? Because it's numbers, it's manipulation of numbers.
Yeah,
it's the context of it that will hide the sneakiness.
Yeah, you need to sort of say, like, this data was collected by, knocking door to door between this period in these locations or whatever. If you were collecting to doing a poll, say you need to say as much as you can about that, and then you can sort of judge for yourself. The reader can judge for yourself a little bit about, okay, well, do I think that's a good way to be gathering data, for example?
Yeah. And you know what, with advertising, you've got things like the Advertising Standards Agency, who are there to receive complaints and to look further into claims. There's some great. I mean, the 8 out of 10 cats prefer whiskers as a classic example of that. There was a Colgate ad, I think, a little while back, 2010, 2011, saying that number one toothpaste used, this particular toothpaste was the number one toothpaste used by dentists. But then there's an asterisk by that, which says that was based on a survey of 300 dentists between this time period. And if you dig a little further, you find that the British Dental Association is actually made up of 23,000 members. So where is it a meaningful sample?
Yeah. So I do hope that AI is going to really help in this remit. So I don't know if you've used ChatGPT-4 today, but they've just done a new upgrade where you can it'll give you the citation of where that information has now come from. So if you say, something ridiculous like which is the most preferred cat food, it will probably say it'll give you that citation of where that whiskers quote came from, and then you can look at the data yourself and blah blah. And I hope that AI is going to become much smarter, that when you read a statistic or whatever, you can ask your AI, where did that come from? Give me a bit more data about it. I don't know if you can then ask the AI to tell you how reasonable that is, and that's when it probably becomes a bit of an arms race over who controls the AI. But it's possible that in time these things will become more transparent and better.
Yes, and as you say, not just on statistics, but I find statistics, unfortunately, quite a hard word to say for this podcast, unfortunately for me. But haven't the BBC started doing a thing over the last couple of years, like fact-checking speeches, political speeches, or claims made by all interested parties? And
there was a thing saying that they should be doing that live during Prime Minister's Question Time. It's really, really difficult to keep up with, and I think potentially the only way to do it will be AIs, right? Because you've got to be so quick with and Jono's got a great sketch of that person talking about the moon saying, "Oh, I think the moon's made of cheese, don't you?" And the other guy's going, "Well, it clearly wouldn't," and is giving all this information about why it's not made of cheese. And the guy's like, "Yeah, whatever. Yeah, it's cheese." It's that whole. It's impossible to disprove. It takes so much more energy to disprove something than it does to be like, "Yeah, no, 50% is about right. Yeah, it's cheese."
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned about AI though. I actually use it because it's excellent in principle at summarising, and I actually fed it a whole load of reviews and said, "Can you summarise these reviews, qualitative reviews, like comments that people had left, and say, can you let me know what the overall is on I don't actually. It matters what the prompt is. I might have said, "What's typical?" or "What's average?" or "Can you summarise?" I don't know what the prompt was exactly.
Yeah.
But I disagreed with it in the end. But it wrote a very plausible thing, and then I went back and I looked at all the reviews, and I was like, "That's not how I would have summarised it." But you wouldn't know that unless you sat down and looked at all the individual ones. It's quite tricky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's still a way to go. Have you asked it about yourself?
No.
It's quite interesting because it can come up with like completely ridiculous stuff. And you're like, hang on, that's about me. No, I know that didn't happen. Or like, oh, that's cool. No, hang on, this didn't happen.
Oh, yeah, nice. I was thinking about the cats and whiskers. Do you remember there's the one like 9 out of 10 people prefer Pepsi, and I remember thinking, like, I think in taste tests, people generally do prefer Pepsi to Coke. What I heard, and I don't know if it's true, is that usually because Pepsi is a little bit sweeter, you prefer it on the first taste. But if you were to drink a whole can of it, you might prefer Coke with something slightly less sweeter. Yeah. And so there it's sort of a really interesting thing where you're like, they collected the data. People said they preferred it.
It's true.
But they didn't. But maybe they only had a sip. So when what do you actually count as a valid approximation to reality? It's quite tricky.
And I went on to the Advertising Standards Authority agency. I went onto their website and tried to find some clear-cut numbers about what a what do you call it when something statistically
valid.
Accurate. Yeah. What is it? There's a term for it. Doesn't matter.
Does to Rob.
Statistically significant. That's the word I was after. So I went on to the Advertising Standards Authority agency. I went onto their website.
Try again.
It's one of those two. ASA, to try and find a kind of set number for surveys to make any kind of advertising claim, to see if there was a set number to make those statistics statistically significant or not. And there is no set number. It's all about kind of proportionality and
it's really irritating.
Those kind of words, reasonable claims. Well, help me define that.
And there isn't clear-cut guidance on it. It's got to be X number of people. Because I remember going through all this when we were doing teeth whitening stuff. We're like,
really?
Can you just tell me how many people we need to have on a survey? Because I see a lot of these, as you said at the beginning, Rob, these sort of beauty surveys where there's a big advert all about L'Oreal or Estee Lauder or something, and 98% of people love this, and you see at the bottom it's like survey of 50 people. You're like, come on.
First time I started noticing that, it just made me laugh. Like, surely that can't be valid. Okay, and we don't know who those 50 people were. Did those 50 people? I don't know, and I'm not accusing any brand.
We surveyed 500 and 450 weren't so bothered, so we just chose these 50.
And did they all receive free goodie bags full of all your goods? Did they
all worked at Estee Lauder?
Did they all? Yeah, we don't know the backgrounds about any
friends
of them.
and family.
Anyway, there we go.
We're just all so cynical of it anyway, aren't we?
Well, yeah, but probably rightly so, because we've been guided down this path by the likes of advertisers. Mind you, that said, I've also been guilty of looking at statistics from, again, and I've talked about this before, when I worked in an office and had a job project managing, and I would do a survey every year, qualitative and quantitative, and when I got those statistics and figures back, I was so excited to delve into them to try and find the best possible way to present myself at my end of year review from those numbers. And I loved it. It's like, brilliant. I've got this spreadsheet full of these numbers. Right.
Massive amount of data.
Let's get going. Where can I find the best statistic?
Let's get rid of that one.
Yeah, exactly. I found one here. I don't think anybody's ever reported this statistic before, but I'm now going to come up with an argument why I feel like it is a really significant statistic to present. So good. I am absolutely guilty of it as well.
You don't work there anymore, do you, Rob?
I don't. But that said, I was trying to find some statistics. Well, I was trying to find some statistics about the about the podcast that I could use to finish off the podcast. I mean, guys, I don't know if you're aware of this, but
the average listeners in the middle of the Atlantic, isn't it?
Well, so according to if you want to cut statistics some ways, 0.1% of Guernsey's population are avid listeners.
Ooh, that is Ben, right?
It's not.
That's the people we know.
We have a close friend who lives in Guernsey, and Guernsey was, of all the locations that get separated out, because Guernsey's not a country, it's I don't know, is it
island? It's
an island, but it's part of. Anyway, it gets separated out from the UK on the back end of our podcast publishing website, so I can see where people are listening from. And I tried to find the location with the smallest national population, or the smallest population, and Guernsey was it. So I went for that because the numbers were quite high in terms of how many listens we'd had.
Amazing.
But 0.1%, it still isn't that big, right? But I was no way near going to go.
Probably wouldn't just pick it out for your annual report. Yeah.
No, but if you went UK, where the majority of our listeners are, and put that against the whatever it's 70,000, that didn't come out any better. But also, did you know that? So this was my highest percentage. I don't know if you're aware of this, guys, but Sketchplanations, the podcast, has a listener to production team ratio of over 2,300%.
Ooh!
So there you go. That's Excellent. A good one.
How's that changed from last episode? Put the graph
we're on episode 8 and no one's heard any of them yet.
Boys, any other business on sneaky averages?
I was trying to think of. It was funny that you asked Tom what the weather was like in China, and you like I was thinking asking the weather in China is kind of like a sneaky average kind of question. As you say, if you're on top of Mount Everest, it's pretty chilly. Where Tom was, it was 29. I was thinking the Marianas Trench is like, if you say the average depth of a stretch of ocean. That's kind of what I drew in my sketch. Yeah. I was trying to think also, like, if you said, like, what's the average flood depth of an area where you were buying like a house or something? We don't really care about the average in that case.
Yeah, very true. What happens at number 77?
Yeah, the maximum's probably more relevant in those kind of scenarios.
This one isn't an average, but in my AOB on this kind of sneaky averages / general statistics episode was on useless statistics, and there was a brilliant one. It must have come up in the Rugby World Cup that's been on telly. I've been watching a lot of recently. And there was a statistic that came up that says that teams going in with a lead at half-time went on to win 50% of the time.
So really,
right, okay. Right, so half the time they won, half the time they didn't. Great, thanks very much, guys. That's great, really helpful.
And they were leading at half time, so they had a bit of an advantage.
Do you know what? I can't remember if it was leading with a half time, but it was something it was 50% of the time. I'm pretty sure it was teams going in with a lead at half time. But it was just like, that is kind of useless.
50% of the time, one of the teams won.
Yes, basically. Yeah,
100% of the time.
100% of the time. One of the teams. I don't think there are any draws in the Rugby World Cup.
I was thinking for weather statistics. So obviously, there's a lot of, like, the climate is changing as a whole, but I think we have so much more data about weather these days that there are so many different ways to cut the numbers and so many different possible things you could look at. There's kind of always some kind of record that you could be saying somewhere. Yeah. Like if you look at the second half of the year has been the hottest second half of the year, or the hottest November, or the most rainfall in the first half of November, or the southwest of England has had the driest spell, driest 16 days that it's ever, like there's like
because on that
infinite
7th day it was incredibly wet, and they just take that one out, and
like ways you could slice it to look at it. That I was thinking about. It's like you finding your best statistic for your.
It is.
Yeah. You're like, well,
how can I cut this?
Hang on, Shetland Isles has had its driest spell for 2 weeks. Since last 20 years or something like that. There's just so many things that you could look at that you could have. There's just records everywhere.
There was, for a number of years, along with a group of probably about 6 or 7 people, I went and ran some of the world's biggest marathons. So some of the big cities like New York, Chicago, London, Berlin. And I remembered this earlier. After some of them, and I remember that in Berlin, like a couple of weeks after, I'd put together a presentation deck, a slide deck, and send it out to everybody. And everybody had their own page, and I would have found their overall result, the result for where they came for their gender, the result for where they came for their gender in that age group, and I'd always find some way of making everybody number one in a particular category. So just keep cutting it. And I think for one of our friends, I came up with for bearded Belgians who are dads over the age of 40, he was number one.
Nice.
That's brilliant. It's like I think one of our friends is like the fastest London marathon dressed as a 3D cartoon character.
Yes, yeah. And that is a genuine Guinness World Record.
Right? Yeah.
Which is very impressive. But I suppose there's a lot of different things you could could have records for.
Hats off to you, Jez, or 3D robot head off to you, Jez.
Yes.
There you go. Well, to close out this episode, instead of quoting some more useless and highly manipulated sketch relations to the podcast statistics, I thought I'd use another supposed Mark Twain quote as Tommy necks back another bit of dairy milk. That facts are stubborn things, but statistics are pliable. Thank you all very much for listening. You can email us your thoughts and your stories about sneaky averages to
hello@sketchrelations.com.
You're disgusting, Tom. We'll be going through last week's correspondence in just a sec. And there'll be another episode ready and waiting for you next week. But for now, again, thanks for listening. Go well, stay well. Goodbye.
See you,
Good night.
Nom, nom, nom.
Nom, nom, nom.
All music on this podcast series is sourced from the very talented Frank Cinelli. And you can find loads more tracks at frankcinelli.com.